Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. In the Trondheim area of Norway, a notorious Gestapo agent led a team of around 50 pro-Nazis. They infiltrated resistance units and penetrated all sorts of organizations. Today, historical fiction writer Janet Oakley, who is a regular in the sidebar, talks about the group and his trial in 1946 for crimes including the murder of SOE teams and Norwegian civilians. Good well, morning. There's just midday there, isn't it, where you are? Midday now, isn't it? Hello, Janet. Have you got YouTube?
Yeah, I'm on. It's noon now. It's noon for me now. Yeah.
Okay. So, well, we're going to get straight off with the show. So, have you got YouTube open on a separate window, Janet? Is that where you're getting feedback?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to close the running YouTube one.
All right. Now I lost this. There we are. Okay, that was the problem.
That's good. Right, there we are.
That was me. All right.
No worries. That's good. So, well, we're going to bring the slides up. Folks, there'll be lots of information in these slides. If you do have questions, please, of course, ask them. But we will hand over to Janet. Take us through this story.
Okay. Well, I want to say too is that there's so many really fine Norwegian historians that talk about this, but I felt that I could kind of give like a teacher an overview of what this was about because the first trial of Oliver Rinnan was so complicated, so many people in that. So I've tried to focus kind of an overview of what it was like. And there's a lot of really great work that you can catch up on. So I thought I would start with kind of like a history because people forget that Norway was the last country that the Germans surrendered to. They actually planned to go on for 6 months. And because of the batteries, which I have maps of, just all up and down the coast. And the soldiers are technically, I think by the time of liberation, there were still 320,000 soldiers down, from like 30,000 from the 350 soldiers still there. And they were very well rested. And they did not want to give up. But they finally agreed. It was kind of Eisenhower pushing them. Anyway, 5 years. And it's really, I think probably for people in military history, is the fact that they all landed at these major points on the same day. So I think it's pretty remarkable. And, the fighting, the ports are taken care of, but the fight goes on for at least another couple of weeks. The Ostfarm is kind of, I think, northeast of Oslo. So there was a lot of burning and fighting going on. Kavan is interesting. I spent the night there with my friends from Trondheim, and the country kind of splits. And so one track will take you back up to Trondheim. The other one will go south, or it'll go over to the east toward the Swedish border. So it's kind of a crucial area that they attacked and burned it to the ground. And then, of course, Molde was bombed out of everything. So we can go on to the next one. So it was all the way to June 10th, and this is because what happened in France. The thing that really surprised me is that there were French and Polish and British soldiers in the middle of Norway trying to stop the advance, but they had a release. So the picture on the left is the old bridge in Trondheim being occupied by German soldiers. And the other ones is soldiers arriving in downtown Trondheim. And the interesting thing about this, right behind them was the Gestapo. They were right there. So on the left is Victoria Tressa. And I went and looked that up a little again to be more familiar. So some of it had apartments, but pretty early on, around 1910. So this is after Norway becomes Norway with a king and everything. There were State Department, mostly, stuff that you would think for running a country were located in there. But the Germans completely took it over. So this was their major headquarters in Oslo. And then on the right is a very interesting photograph. These are intelligence officers, probably part of the SS or the larger thing. And they're arriving at the Phoenix Hotel, which is just down the block from where the Mission Hotel. So this was the first Gestapo place. And the thing is that apparently someone complained about the rooms. So they moved down the block to what would become Mission Hotel and the Gestapo headquarters in Trondheim, very central to what's going on in that part of Norway. So almost immediately, this I find really interesting. So they're still fighting up the middle of Norway, but Joseph Terboven is made Reichskommissar for Norway in April 24, and he's a personal friend. He had a command of 6,000 people, which included the secret police. And I think it's Jonas Lees, who's Rice, who's on the left, and he's part of the state police setup. Quisling will not become minister right off, even though he got on the phone, radio the first night, but not till 41. You can see him here on the left, and then over here on the right, with this long trench coat, and that's Terboven again up there talking. I believe that's the University of Oslo. So the other thing that happened almost immediately, they were arresting people in the September. There are huge fights. They actually executed a couple of the labor union members. And then so finally, by the following year, they established concentration camps. They're holding people, but now they're putting in places. And actually, one of my friends here belongs to Daughters of Norway. Her father was prisoner number 10, sent to Greenie. I think they were from Namso or Narvik. They were hostages that were sent to Greenie. And he was there the whole time, throughout the whole war. Falstad is just an hour north of Trondheim. It was originally a boys' reformatory. The Germans took it over, and we'll see a picture later what it looked like. But this is when I visited there in 2017.
And a quick question for you, Janet. The fact that they are bringing so many Gestapo people really early in their occupation, do we have a kind of an understanding of the reason for that? Is it because that they think Norway is very independent-minded, lots of mountains, lots of places where underground movements could set up? Are they going in with a real sort of suspicion that it's the kind of place where underground activity would set up?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that. I think the goal was to be very friendly with Norwegians, because they treated them different than everybody else, like Poles or Czechs, because they felt they were Aryan brothers. There's all this mystique stuff. But I think also there were military probably things that they needed to protect. They almost immediately began working on U-boat bases, like both in Bergen and in Trondheim. So there's probably other reasons why. They're also very interested in getting rid of any communists. So that was one of the big pushes initially. And so I don't really know if I'm qualified to answer that, but that would be my guess, is that they're there because they want to be friendly, but they also want to be paying attention. And of course, they really start going hard. Probably beginning in 1941. They start.
Dr. Phil is saying because of the proximity to Sweden, it is good. I guess also if you're trying to be friendly with people, you also want to remove anybody very quickly who is showing signs of not being friendly, so that that kind of feeling doesn't spread, I guess.
Right, I think so. And of course, there are major nickel mines way up in the north that the Germans are very interested in. There are the fisheries. And the border's right there at Sweden. When I went home from visiting my friends in Kvam, we went up through Røros and right along the border. The border was right there, and reindeer were right there. And that was major escape routes to go into Sweden. So yes. So at one point, I always find this amazing. Berlin had 3 million people in their population in the census of 1940. And that's how many people lived in Norway. It spread out this long, thin country. And there were almost at one point 400,000 soldiers stationed throughout there. And one historian who deals with courts and stuff like that, she said, the Germans were everywhere. They were in public spaces, like out in the square like that. They were at work. Often Norwegians had Germans working in like the drafting office, or maybe they're working down in the pant, whatever. And then in private spaces, because a lot of times the troops would take over school. And be housed there, and then school would happen a couple hours a day. So they're everywhere. Which leads to justice during the occupation. So during this time, the German Wehrmacht courts played a central role as instruments of occupation in Norway during World War II. Both Norwegians and civilians and German soldiers alike were brought before military tribunals. Often the punishments were handed out that were very severe. And this was through a chat with a historian in Trondheim who deals with law. And she said, yeah, this is how it was run. This was the order. So your civilian courts, they were just not there. And I just want to run a few things that, you couldn't do, singing the national anthem or flying the flag. But the most important ones is restricted movement. You had to have aggression pass. That means border. And it's what's interesting, of course, if you're in Oslo, your pass is going to be you're divided into districts too. And then on the coast, they considered the coast a border. So you had a special pass for being allowed to be there. Another thing too, spot checks could happen anytime. And, bring books and stuff like that. I have a friend who's 101 years old. She was a teenager in Bergen. She just lives about 3 miles from me. And was very helpful in my last novel, The Brisling Code. But she got in trouble for buying flowers. I think she was 16. She got in trouble for buying flowers to celebrate King Haakon's birthday. And she and a bunch of other friends had the flowers ripped away from them, took away their pass, and she had to report the Gestapo headquarters. And I asked her, what was it like in there? And she said, well, I recall it was offices. And that's what it was. The first floor was all offices for running. And they got a reprimand. And that was it. But even something as innocent as that, I mean, they could do a check on your family and maybe find out something's going on, so that was kind of unnerving. And there's one more slide about this. And this one is really important about the fishing limit. Germans wanted to have the fisheries and things like certain fish produce glycerin. You needed that for, machine and stuff like that. So that's why they were going after fishing way up north in the Narvik area. So you couldn't go out. Of course, the Shetland bus is coming in. They're coming in the early years as fishing boats. But so you had to have a sign in your wheelhouse being warned that you could be put to death. So that's sort of the setup there. And then all of a sudden, it's 1945. Actually, Norwegians thought after the fall of Paris that they would be next, but they were the very, very last. Celebrations May 7th is the day. For the Norwegians, it's the 8th, and actually officially the 9th of May. So what's happening? Well, Hitler's dead, the Russians are in Berlin, and then the Allies forces have cut Germany in half. So during the last year, especially since the fall of Paris, back to the Allies, they were all what they call the Norwegian Swedish police. There were camps over the border in Sweden, training people how to keep the place in order. And this is like guarding, power plants. Some are trained to go about the business of rounding people up who were up to no good. And in Trondheim, they're waiting for the Gestapo to be over. So just to put you in mind where everything is. So it was the 3rd largest city. And I think in 1940, it was about 52,000 people. It was about the size of my town, probably 40 years ago. And an important thing here at the time is called the Norwegian Institute of Technology. But Tronstad, who was behind the heavy water, he was one of the professors who alerted that and actually advised them in London. It started there. He was a professor there, and then he had to flee. Today, it's called the NTNU. Of course, agriculture, fishing, mining is there. And then incredible history, Viking, a most beautiful cathedral. I think it's as fine as Notre Dame. Medieval history. And of course, the cathedral's built over St. Olaf. So there's this incredible history. And today, lots of jazz, concerts, music, and really good food. They're getting a lot of attention for food. Back then, it was different. And just a quick, I love this shot taken of people hearing the king they're in front of one of the newspapers. It's interesting, May 7th was when VE Day is, and that day, the Milorg had made arrangements with the Germans that local newspapers could finally write their own news. And so they're celebrating, they're listening to King Haakon on the radio, but they're standing outside a newspaper place, and I love that picture. So Wohlen Prison is actually right by this university. And if you look at the kind of the roundish building, you can see it kind of at the very back. That is the student union. But the Wohlen Prison is now a parking lot. So I went with my friend. We walked all over, did a walkabout all over Trondheim. And it's a parking lot now. But this was a pretty notorious prison, jail where people were held for various different things. What's happening here, they're releasing, Usings or patriots are being released and being reunited with families. So here's what Frostating looked like back in the 1940s. It's highly barricaded, and it was intended for political prisoners. They had Russians, Yugoslavs mainly here. They had Norwegians were held there as hostages. And if you look to the far left, up in the top, you'll see a road going up there. And it's sort of the beginnings of a forest. That is the Frostating Forest. It was a killing place. It's the first killing field I have ever been in my entire life. The most sobering thing. But they would take, everybody who was goes through these, military courts, he would be taken up there and shot. And when you go through the forest now, they have these big kind of little triangle pyramids with a Roman numeral on it, all through it out. It probably had 25 bodies in one of those graves. It's the most sobering thing. Meanwhile, while everyone was celebrating, there was work to do. So everybody's celebrating. I mean, there's dancing going on. A lot of people went out to Frostating and helped the Russians and brought them into town. There's a lot of stuff going on. But Milorg and the police, these Swedish police, they were out there, and they are going to be picking up names. The NS is the National Samling. That was the Nazi party. And I love this picture on the right. The two guys, the hands behind their back, were with the Gestapo. They're Norwegians with the Gestapo. And you can see uniform is kind of lax. They have armbands, but to identify them that they are with the police. The guy on the left has a pistol, and the other one has a stun gun, from what I can see. And so again, Paul and I were talking earlier, what I found interesting is from like early on, and when anyone came from Norway into London or into Sweden, they would sit them down and say, did you hear about they shot, farmer so-and-so for doing something or other? And then when they got 3 of those, they would put it in a file. So I found it extraordinary from the very beginning. It seemed like they would have these files on atrocities, and they were keeping track. And I don't know if other countries did that, but I thought, of course, they had the freedom of being in London. The London exile government was in London. So maybe that, although I know the Poles had an exile government, I understand. I think that's correct. Yeah. But they were organized so they could have a legal office in London and be putting these things together, which I find really interesting. This famous shot, they're digging up graves. They often had members of the NS, sometimes Wehrmacht were put in this, but they were making pretty darn sure that locals who were involved with any kind of stuff are digging up. And you can see the beginnings behind it of the Frostating forest. So there was immediate research for Henry Oliver Rinnan, but when they got up to this house, he was gone. And there was a huge widespread search everywhere. They were looking everywhere for him. So who was he? Why was he so important? So Henry Oliver Rinnan was from Levanger. So that's about an hour. I think it took us about, 70 minutes to get up there, because we stopped at Frostating. We stopped at another place where the Turpits had been a place. That was another fun trip. But so it took a little bit over an hour to get up there. At the time, it was like a really kind of rundown logging town, kind of poor. They had big mills there. And he was born in 1915. He was the eldest of 8 killed kids. His father was a shoemaker. They were very, very poor. And the thing about him, how small he was, I've seen quoted both 5'3", but also 5'1". He was like a little boy, and you can see him as he's in court. You can see how small he is. But people always said that he was so charming, and he could just talk charm, and that was one of his skills. He married Clara Verdal. Now I just recently saw another last name for her, so I'm wondering about that. But they lived in an apartment in Levanger, and they had a son, Roar. And he briefly worked for his uncle, but he was fired for theft. During the Winter War, he tried to join, but because of his small size, he did not. But he ended up driving a truck for the Norwegian army during the invasion. And then, so interesting, June 1940, he's down at Mission Hotel. By then, they decided Mission Hotel's better. And he's starting to work with the Germans. And that's a psychology thing, you really wonder about it. So why was his capture so important? Well, he was Gestapo's first Norwegian agent in Trondheim. He worked closely with, I'll be able to pronounce that, the German Schweizerpolizei in Trondheim. His main contacts were Gerhard Flesch, who actually had been Gestapo down in Bergen. And he moves up there a little bit later, I think about 1940. He's out of there by 1942, up in Trondheim. And then Walter Gemmick. Flesch, actually, his little pet project was Frostating, and he was a monster. Working at first alone, Rinnan exposed Norwegian weapons, catches, because this is important. A lot of soldiers, once everything, we're defeated, they started bearing their weapons, usually long arms. You might have 3 or 4 wrapped up and burlapped and buried. And what Rinnan did, he started going around pretending to be, a veteran of the Winter War and just talking. And he was great at talking. And soon these things were exposed. And then the big one was exposing a left-wing organization of 50, 60 people. He added more people to his group. The Norwegians called it Rinnanbanden, and the Germans called it Sonderabteilung. I can't pronounce it. Lola is generally what it was known as, Lola by the Gestapo. He ran a notorious torture chamber in Trondheim called the Cloister in English. And actually, I think this gruesome stuff is really what drew all this international attention to him, because the gruesomeness of this group really shocked people. I mean, they're seeing a lot of stuff, but this was really bad. And it was a Norwegian doing it. That was the other thing, I think. So the Indian, he had 70 male and female agents on his payroll of 75,000 a year, and 2,000 negative agents. And I'll talk about those. He was responsible for the death of 83 people in the Norwegian resistance, the gang. SE Norway also went through there. 1,000 cases of severe torture, and sending more than 1,000 Norwegian to concentration camps. So sometimes they would go to Greening, maybe they're at Frostating, and then off they go further, like to Dachau or something. Most of them, the Norwegians always seem to end up in Sachsenhausen.
Right.
That was kind of like, so he personally killed 3, and he was Norway's number 2 war criminal. When you think of the number 1, Quisling he was more like a figurehead. But his things that he did, were under, bad, but he was the real criminal.
So a quick question for you, Janet. Where do we think his motivation comes? Because the money there and the people that we know from in other resistance units around, or pro-Nazi units, people are doing it for money. They're doing it for power. I mean, he's obviously, was he overtly kind of fascist, we think, before the war? What do you think his primary motivation is? Power, money, pro-Nazis? Always a mixture of all of the above.
Well, people have tried to analyze him. And I've had a couple of historians saying, "Oh, don't do that." But I think his parents apparently were in the National Samling and had leanings like that. Who knows? He was bullied. He's one of the classic things as someone who's bullied for his size, and maybe just something about it. And it also brought out, the fact that he stole from his uncle. There were a couple other things that he did. He just wasn't on the right track. But again, he was very cunning.
Okay.
So it's hard to say. Yeah. So the hunt for him, I tried to show from the distance of Trondheim almost up to the Swedish border. The Swedish border is that orange there. They didn't know where he was. And finally, a hostage escaped. They took 2 hostages with them with the intent that they would be shot. In fact, it was Flesch who gave it to them. One of them, it's amazing, he had hardly no shoes on, badly beaten, and he made it to a farmhouse, and then they were alerted. So they sent a huge former Mueller unit up there from Levanger to go get him. He almost made it into, he was going to go to the Soviet Union. He had this idea, I know all this stuff because I've been, arresting communists. And so he made his way up there and they got caught in a blizzard. So by the time that this hostage escaped, they were able to find him. And this gives you a good idea of his arrest.
Yeah, thank you.
He was held at Mission Hotel. Took 11 months to assemble. So we had the prosecutor, which we'll talk about in a minute, but they also had quite a number of police investigators because they're going to not just do Rinnan, they are doing his entire front group of 29 people total. I mean, it's remarkable. And then something happened. So he's actually in the basement and you can see the jail. And actually before that, the Gestapo used this place for torture way down the bottom. So it's kind of ironic. He's also put down there. But he got away and it's still a mystery. And so I'll just show you the next slide. Because at one point, there's a lot of conspiracy. And I decided I'm just going to step back. I'm listening to a couple of historians and saying, they think they know, but they just don't know. But that we do know he got free from a cell. He jumped from a window. And from there, he made his way to someone he thought could trust, but was back at Mission Hotel a couple hours later. He was out like half a day. And so I'm just going to leave it there because one military historian said a lot is perceived about his escape or interpretations of Rinnan's own statements in the light of the later Cold War. And this is true. He was trying to, because he had infiltrated a lot of these large resistance group in Trondheim that had ties to the local Communist Party and labor movements. He thought, this will get me out of the death penalty. Maybe there's people who are outside who might be interested in what I have to say. But it didn't really work. So we'll just leave it. It's still a mystery. Rinnan never revealed who it was that helped him. And there is a movie coming out about him. It's going to be on Prime and it's regular. So we'll see. I'll be curious to see how they do that particular storytelling. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you.
So I was escape when he's back in. It was actually, it did show up in one of the communist newspapers. He got out, but he was back in jail. And the trial began April 13th, 1946. So this is a screenshot from an NKR. They actually had international film crews in there. It's remarkable. Again, this sensation about how gruesome. I mean, we're learning all about concentration camps, but this individual, this group, gangster group, really attracted attention. So on the right is actually the 29 in there. Rinnan is the top left in that group. And then behind against the wall, these are actually I think these are the judges that are going to be listening to the evidence. And below them are the prosecutors. And I believe the gentleman that is on the left is the prosecutor. So it's kind of how it's laid out. There's other shots. To the left is the jury. And then what's off screen down below is they had a wide audience. They had reporters there. They had regular people there. So it was a big deal. It's on the second floor of this. It's one of the Court of Appeals. It's a system in Norway. So it took 6 hours to read the indictments. And then when I was in Trondheim, the Justice Museum has all this collection. This was saved by a police officer after the war. He felt this, sometime as the evidence goes away, he felt, no, this is too important. We're going to preserve it. And it became kind of one of the foundations of developing the museum, like I think in the 60s or very early 70s. But these are all the badges that people wore. The thing behind them, I'll show pictures of that. But it has the torture instruments, the barrels that were part of a lot of people's experience there. And then the book that's on the chair is the Saker, and that is the indictment and the final results of his trial. So leading the prosecution was John Ling, I think that's how you pronounce it. So he was a local Trondheim person. He grew up there. He got his law degree in Oslo, became a deputy general in 1928. So he was elected to Trondheim's municipal court. And he was active in politics in Trondheim. Now, during the German occupation, he became involved in resistance, but this is the interesting thing that he got out of there in 43. And remember, we talked before about 1942, all over Europe and Norway, the Gestapo is coming down really hard. That's where a lot of these atrocities are happening. There was a lot of things that happened in Trondheim. The murder of 10 prominent people. They're still trying to find their bodies. But so he fled to Sweden. And this is the interesting part. He already, with the Norwegian legal office in Stockholm, he is gathering information on Norwegians assisting Germans. Already in 43, they're building cases against people who they felt we need to look into after the war. And it's very comprehensive, and it would lay out the strategy for justice. And then he moved on to London and worked there. So he's appointed the public prosecutor in Trondheim. And for the defense is Torvald Vig, and he's also born and raised in Trondheim. His parents ran a bakery, so during the occupation, he obviously couldn't practice law, so he helped run the bakery. But one of the things that my takeaway talking to both Frode Linderjet, and then I talked to Knut Siversen. He was a retired police officer at the Justice Museum and was from an early time, he was very interested in Rinnan's trial. And they both implied that, because there was all military courts during the war, they really we need to get back to our system of justice, which included having legal counsel. And so they hired Torvald Wig, who was considered, one of their best lawyers. And he had, got his master's in law. He served as assistant attorney, and then the war started. Then he became a baker. And then after the war, he went back acting magistrate. The Godal area is to the east of, it's part of Trondheim, but it's to the east. And just a couple of pictures. So this is 1945 during the 46. I'm sorry, during the trial, and it's located downtown.
Thank you.
And then just some of the stuff. The one on the left said the worst of them all. It's showing the very famous poster. It says "Welcome to the party" that was down in the basement. The house at the top is what became the cloister. And this is just a cartoon that was, because there, again, this intense interest in this trial once it got started. So reporters would be coming out, making statements about what is going on.
Another quick question for you, Janet. Is he's solely being tried for crimes against Norwegians, or is there anything to do with British SOE? Are there any British representatives of the legal system there, or is it solely a Norwegian affair?
He's because of what happened in the cloister. If there were SOE people that were tortured and killed, like Johnny Pevek is one of the most famous ones. And I tried to, so it's everything that he did. He personally killed 13, some of his own gang members, but he may also have been responsible for, I think he definitely killed Froland, but who was ex-U. But yeah, it's all comprehended. And I don't see, like I say, there's probably more detail to this, who testified. There could have been someone who had, I don't think any SOE person made it out of their life, but there was maybe someone who was coming in to tell their side of the story. I know Johnny Pevek was Norwegian, but I think he was with Linga Company or something like that. I tried to find his grave. When I first started researching 30 years, I made a promise, if I ever go to Trondheim, I'm going to find his grave and put flowers on it. And it turns out he's not buried there, but there is a plaque. So that's what I did.
Okay. And
this is just sort of what's happening. People are waiting for these vans to come in. I honestly don't, I tried to find out where the regular gang members were. I think they were at Vollen prison, but Rinnan was held at Mission Hotel.
Thank you.
And this is also at the Justice Museum, but it's showing all the different people, that all 29 of them, they're going to just do the whole gang. These are considered the top people. So I thought it was important to kind of give some structure to this because there are a total of about 30 cases. And I just thought I'd pick out some of them that was kind of like the early successes of his to get an idea, but some of them went all the way into 1943. So, and I love this. This map is actually from a book that was published by British Naval Intelligence in 1942. After they tried to go in there and had terrible maps, they had Badekers from 1927. No one had done any kind of mapping in that area. And you have the Poles, French, and English are going in there trying to stop the Germans. So they felt we need to have geography about this area. So I love these maps. They've done all the ports in Trondheim. I mean, all over Norway. So the first one, this was called the Fisvik. The Germans call it the communist case. And this was during the winter and the spring of 41. So remember, things are, Norwegians are kind of getting used to everything. The German soldiers are trying to get used to everything, but people are starting to push back. And so in the winter of 41, a legal group was formed in Trondheim under the leadership of various members of the Communist Party. Their main focus was anti-German propaganda. And Rinnan, in his charming way, kind of worked his way into this group, saying that he was, he's really interested. His name was Fisvik. And over time, it took a while. They gave him kind of little jobs to do, but eventually got the trust right to the head of the organization. And he began to travel around the districts as a propagandist. And then in the fall, they jumped on him, and 53 were raided. So down, if you look, I think probably down by the ports, there were, that's where some of these clubs were meeting. But that was his first big success. And the Germans took note. He did this all by himself.
Wow.
So this is another wonderful map from the British Naval Intelligence book. And of course, this was considered a major war crime. This wasn't just confined to Trondheim. This was a major war crime, but it was his first major action. So in 42, he put together a little group of people. And at the end, I can show you the names. The names are actually Igvar Olberg, Bjorn Jenhus, and then Ragnhild Strom. And so the Gestapo, they called it the North Sea traffic. The other thing was the Shetland buses involved with this. And I didn't find the name of the group. It's the Warner Group, but it was a very, very best organized group that was sending refugees over to Shetland and then bringing back agents and arms and stuff like that be dispersed out the area. It was very, very well run. And he sent these 3 people down to Olsen and just started chatting. And this is where a woman could kind of, be chatty and talk, and then you finally get yourself into it. So they got wind of this group that there was, I think this boat had already gone over once before, but this is a big fishing boat. And they got wind of this boat. And first the boat took off and there was engine trouble, so they had to go back. So you can see where Olesen is, where the arrow is pointing, but there's little fjords back in there, these little islands. And so they went back to get fixed up. And because this boat's going to take them out to the Shetland bus. It's not like the Shetland bus is coming in. They're going to meet this other boat. And that's when his men boarded, the 2 men boarded the boat. And by the time they got out to where they were going to meet the boat from Shetland, they were all arrested. And the thing that made this a war crime is that when just a few months later, when that incident at Tolleville happened, 2 agents were executed for killing, Gestapo agents were killed. They took these boys, 18 of them, and executed them along with other people. So it became a huge crime. This is one of the things that you'll find in a lot of larger law stuff. But he was very successful. Another one was picking up after the Fiskit group. So Henry Senstad and the Verdal brothers were members of the Workers' Sports Federation, part of the NKP, the Norge Kommunist Party. The party had been banned in August 40. So after the roll-up there, Thingstad became leader of this group. And Karsten Wehrdahl had access to a stencil machine. So stencils were illegal. And this is one of the things that might be brought over on the Shetland bus, or if you went to Sweden over the border there and come back, you'd be bringing stencils for your machines. And having a machine was also illegal. And so this was considered a subgroup. And if you look at the map, this is another one of these wonderful British naval intelligence maps. If you look there at the bottom is Loken. Loken was a major mine. I can't remember if it was copper or if it was pyrite. Also up Thameshaven, which is up near the top of the little fjord. That's the kind of little left side of the little fjord coming in there. That was also a major mine. It was a subject of several sabotages to blow it up because pyrite was there. Orkdal was another one. So you see he's working around, they're all working around getting people in this area. The Selbu, which is, you see, look at the river to the right. I think it's Breutem. There's a pass that goes all the way to Sweden, and that was the major, what they call export route. Mehus is also there, but as far south as Namso is north, and then Rorvik, which is on Vikna. And so they got, there again, illegal newspapers, curry activities, military intelligence, and transporting refugees. And the Verdar group had its own refugee route across Stjørdal. Jews, resistant workers, and couriers went that way. So they were a very active group. They were a subgroup, but they were active. So the roll-ups, which is what they called them, from 40 to 43, the groups were two of the most active. It's very interesting. This is the middle of Norway, and it was one of the most very active groups in all of Norway. And so in February 43, after years of infiltration, Thingstad group was rolled up. And Henry Thingstad, 43 things are starting to change. Up to this point, Rinnanbanden, his group of negative people, agents and all that, they're mainly gathering stuff, fingering people, and sending the information on to the Gestapo. But in 43, the Gestapo said, you can, they were interrogated at Mission Hotel, and Rinnan might be there with his people interrogating. But now it's sort of like, oh, you can just go ahead and do your own thing. So Thingstad was the first person to record ever tortured by Rinnanbanden. And it was pretty awful. And then they were executed in May. So, just at the fortress, which is up in Trondheim. And then in October of 43, the Gestapo arrested the 10 members of the Verdar group. And this group was convicted by the SS in Trondheim. 8 were executed. There were 2 younger members, and they kind of gave them hard. I don't know if they went to Frostating, but they were kind of given lighter sentence. They may have been sent to Germany, concentration camp. So Karsten Wehrdahl and his brother Radar were executed. So those are some of the big prominent ones in the cases. But this is a total of 30. So you see Olsen down at the bottom, which is the Olsen boys. Molde had a number of things happening there. The little island of Frøya, which is above Hitra. So Hitra is quite a large island, and I wanted to go out there, but I wanted to do the boat. But now they have a tunnel. You can go under the water to Hitra. And it was a pretty active place. They had a pretty active resistance group there. All the way up to the top is Vikna. There's a horrible thing that happened up there. And Rinnan was brilliant. And he had his side man, Ivar Grande, who was from there. It's amazing how they took that whole, it's horrible, but it's amazing how they took that whole group down by sending in negative agents. And they actually, the leader of that one, Minister Mo, they pretended to have him kidnapped. Well, he was arrested, really arrested by the Gestapo, and Rinnan got really upset. And so they broke him out of the Bolen prison, and they scooted him over to Sweden. And he thought, wow, these are my friends. And London was warning them, this is all of whist. This is not real. But unfortunately, they were really bamboozled, I guess is the best way to say it. And that whole thing, it was horrible. It's a horrible collapse.
And a quick question for you. Gina asked, did the Gestapo also go after the families of those that you've mentioned who were executed or deported? Would they extend their reprisals against members of the family and neighbors as well?
I think they did. I mean, you might have your family put in Frostating. Whether they were executed or not, I can't answer that, but they definitely were watched or fined, or but often they were sent away. They might be sent far. That certainly happened in Tel Aviv. All those families were sent. The men were all sent to Sachsenhausen, and the women were put in concentration. Really a high school, but they were underboarded. So I wanted to show you when I was there, my friend Tori Egan, we did a walkabout. And so from 42 to 45, Rinnan had a total of 8 hideouts around the city. And it's very important how this organization worked. So the Brata Gata on 12B, which is on the right, was the first gang's headquarters. And they were upstairs. We got really close to it and kind of walked around it. But he said, yeah, that top building right there on the street where those top windows are, that's where they met. And then the Fjordgata, which they're both kind of almost down to the water in the town. So if you look at the Trondheim, they call it the Trondheim Road, but if you look down on the map over here, you can see they're kind of down this area of the city. And the second one, we had offices, businesses there, and female were secretaries, hostesses. So, you might be, resistance people might come there and there'd be a woman greeting them and, talking and being around, and kind of lowers the, the kind of the scariness of who am I talking to and stuff like that. So those were 2 of them, but they had them all over town. Wow. And they were run by different people. But in 43, so again, the Gestapo is giving them permission to kind of do their own thing. So they took over this house, which is still there. I just met the cousin of one of my friends here in town. She said, yeah, they had a kindergarten there after the war. I mean, this place is like, I think in America, you blow it up. You don't want to have anything to do with what went on there. But anyway, they took it over because the owner, I think, was at Frostating. And they had a hostess there. I mean, that's the most remarkable thing. But in the basement. So we drove behind it because it was being rented out. The Justice Museum, I think, is working to restoring the basement as a museum. They were doing some work down there. I didn't show that slide, but they're doing work down there. And I think they're kind of rethinking about it, maybe because, the 80th anniversary of the liberation, that got a lot of people looking at stories that maybe we need to be talking about this again. But it became an absolute place of horror. So again, the welcome to the party. There was another poster that said, everything you know, I will know. So they had these horrible posters on the wall in the basement. So it gives you an idea. So this was this book that was there in the exhibit. I got a chance to handle it, and they gave me a couple of pages. But it was called Jovan's Vian 46. And it's kind of like a storyboard. They used this one particularly to highlight the murder of a person named Freuland. And he actually was I think he was only 21 or something like that. And he worked with XU, which was the secret gathering Norwegian group. And so this was used in the testimony about his murder. The picture on the right was used in evidence showing how it worked down there. But if you look on the left, you'll see all the rooms are marked out. And the storehouse number 10 was known as where this torture went on. And it was like a little wine cellar kind of thing. They had barrels in there, and they just took it over. And this is where they did it. And here's some, again, from the exhibits. The torture instruments, pretty awful. These were also shown at the trial. And sometimes the person who had been a victim there, because they did have people testify, there may actually been some Brits that testified and made it out there, but I honestly don't know. but they were often shown these pieces of torture and asked them how they worked and how were they used on. It was very emotional. But they were saved by a police officer. And again, this is from the trial. So it's showing. So when I talked to Knut Sivertsen, because he'd been a police officer in Trondheim, at the time I was there, they were having people knocking geraniums off the front porch. There wasn't a lot of crime going on in Trondheim, but he had interviewed a lot of people who had been in the one particular was the son talking about his father who had been in the cloister. And he said, when my dad testified, he kept breaking down. Just was horrible to relive it. You're doing it about a year or two after it happened to you. And Knut said, you know, I worked a lot with domestic violence, you know, in our city, and he saw the same thing, reaction. So he could understand why someone who was being interviewed, because it's not only the prosecutor talking to you, it's the defense lawyer who's talking to you. And it's very traumatic. So this drawing was used to illustrate the murders of the three people I mentioned earlier. But Dagfinn Frøyland, he had actually been working with XU. And he was lured on the promise that with a negative agent, that he had a chance to get out of Norway into Sweden. And it really was someone who thought she was doing good, and she really was working directly for Rinnan. And so, I mean, it's pretty wild. Our showing where Frøyland was killed, he was shot. The other person was a gang member that was kind of like a rival of Rinnan's. He was shot along with his girlfriend. His girlfriend was hung. And then they had gotten coffins for them because it's what they would do. And they discovered the bodies were too big. So they were chopped up. Mm. I mean, it's so gruesome. And again, this is why this trial just was like, you know, front page, yeah. You know, it's just too gruesome. This was one of the most gruesome ones. So how did he work? Well, he was very good at getting into talking to people. And more by 43, he's not going out at the field, he's not. But he had a total of 22,000 negative agents. So what this is something he's very proud of. And it may have been done in other countries, but he had this thing where he would persuade their way in and talk to people. And they would show things like maybe tapes of King Haakon's talks on the BBC. Cigarettes were really popular, real good cigarettes. Virginia tobacco was very popular. And just show stuff. I'll show I'm a patriot and just get people talking. And so they're very unsuspecting. Norwegian government, then we say they're helping. Some people, when they found out that they were maybe not doing what they would say, oh, I work for the Tolt. Because apparently the organization Tolt was considered less awful than being in the Gestapo, but that's one of the things I've read. But anyway, so it was all run by Olaf Wist. That was his name. That's the name he used on Vigda. But he had other names as well. And they were instructed to keep an eye out for both German and Norwegians. You know, if you see anything going on, let me know, because we need to know what's going on, because we're Usings. We're good people. And members might be suspicious because it might be your friend that you went to high school with, or went to church together, or your dad and father worked together. So they were very successful. And both men and women served this role, some unwittingly. So Randy Rue from the island of Frøyland, she is the one who innocently betrayed Dagfinn Frøyland, because she said he contacted her like this is almost the end of the war. It was like April 25. And so just in a few weeks, the war is going to be over. And so they were all desperate. He was desperate to get out of Trondheim. And she said, well, I have this expert group that can help you. And he ended up in the cloister. And it's so sad. But
this implies, Janet, that he's intelligent. If you're playing all these games of telling different people different things and bringing people in by distraction and lying and telling people think they're working for the pro-Norwegian government, they're actually working against them. To keep something like that under control, you need a kind of a Machiavellian, but also incredibly intelligent. Does that come across in what you researched? That he's a horrible person, obviously, but he really is good at what he does.
Yeah, and I think Norwegians, that stuff that I've been reading and talking to people, yeah, you have to give him credit that he was above average smart, and he was very good at that. And one person commented saying that he was also smooth talking with women. You know, he had a lot of mistresses. He was married. And in fact, his last kid was in January of 1945. But he had mistresses, but he could smooth talk. So kvinna means women. And he used these very attractive women. I think the one that's right in the center, that's Inga Lerfold. And the one on the far right is why when her name went out of my head. Anyway, we'll see her in a minute. I think I need water.
Have a glass of water, that's fine.
Yeah, let me go. Maybe get out of here. I don't have it beside me.
Okay, go again. I'll talk to the group while you're gone. So yeah, don't have to get water. So to remind you folks, we have 2 shows coming your way tomorrow. David is coming on from Australia to talk about the crimes, Japanese war crimes on Morotai, and then World War II TV regular James Fenelon is coming on later in the day to talk about the Japanese airborne in World War II, the Japanese paratroops and their airborne force. It'll be really good. So they're both daytime shows if you're UK, or evening if you're Australia. The first one with David Gormley O'Brien, and then James Fenelon is on later on. As always, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to click like and subscribe. Buy my guest books. The link to Janet's website is in the description below, where you can find historical fiction. The link to her books on Amazon is also below, but I'll bring Janet back in now. There we go.
Okay, sorry about that. So anyway, she's probably the most famous one, but I would also say that Inga Lerfold is also right up there, because Lerfold was gorgeous, and she really used it. She came all glam to the thing and sitting in the booth. So Kitty, she was first horse, and then she married, he was an architect, I believe, and he was a National Socialist, so National Samling. And she later joined too. And so they lived in Erlingsakegata, which is a really nice place in Trondheim on the 5th floor. And so he goes off to fight the Russians as part of the North League that they had there in Norway. So he took off, and then she started an affair with Ivar Grande. And he was actually second command to Rinnan by this time. And through Grande, Rinnan was able to use her apartment. So he was for meetings with resistance fighters, and she would act as hostess. She was very charming. And many resistance fighters were arrested there. One of them was Thordog Berg. He was later executed in 1943 in the Falstad story. So the movement from there, I don't think at that time in June, by then, I think when he was executed, they probably were now at the cloister. But this is this building. It's like a huge block of a building. It's still there. And then she fell out of favor, which is really interesting because, she's having an affair with Grande, but also at the same time, she met someone, maybe one of the guys that came to her apartment that's trying to get out of there. And she's a negative agent acting. And fell in love with him. Well, Rinnan thought she was unreliable, and he literally sent her to Greenie and then to Ravensbrück. It's really remarkable. And she had a little boy, and so her husband's fighting the Russians, and she's in Ravensbrück, and her little boy died. And for some reason, that kind of, I don't think it touched anybody, but Ivar Grande was able to get her out, and she ended up marrying him, and they moved to Ålesund. And then not long after that, he was shot and killed by the Milorg group. So the people at trial always remember her as arrogant, and you can actually see her being interviewed in the 80s, and she comes across like that. Very, doesn't bother me kind of attitude. It was really,
wow.
Yeah, pretty amazing. So she got 8 years and then was released in 51. A lot of people were released in 51.
Okay, thank you.
And so here there are other, and I should say too, I think it's in December of 1944, they didn't have death penalty in Norway. That was not a thing. But they felt that some of these crimes, like Rinnan's, I think 13, he did something, his group did something like 40% of all the crimes in all of Norway. That's how bad. And they realized, for some people, we need to have a death penalty. So that was permitted. And so there will be people that will receive that. But there was kind of like, we were talking about the other trial that you had yesterday. People were they were uncomfortable with the idea, but it had to be kind of like those things it had to be done. So Ragnhild Strom was number 4. So you have that whole list with their badges. And she's the one that went down with the 2 other men to Ålesund and infiltrate the group, get to know them, and then find out about the boat that led to the boys being, they were like 18-year-olds. They were young. I mean, oldest was probably 20. The ship captain also was killed. She got 20 years and then was released in 1951. Inga Lerfar was hired by Rinnan, and she worked as a clerk and maid at the headquarters. So she was that first place downtown Trondheim. And she proved herself to be a useful agent. She went up and down the coast. And then she kind of got uncomfortable with Rinnan. Some of these women started going like, I don't want to do this anymore. And he didn't like that. That was, I don't trust you kind of thing. But she started training as a telegraphist with a German intelligence service in the winter of 45. And this group was planning on, because they thought the Allies would invade. If Norway didn't surrender, if Germans didn't surrender, they would have another 6 months of fighting. And the Allies did not want that. But this group was thinking, yeah, if the Allies come, we'll be ready. She's ready. She's trained to, send messages and stuff like that. And she's the one that showed up at the trial with fancy hats. She always dressed well. And they also said, yeah, she was like, Kitty. She was arrogant. And she was given hard labor. She was considered that bad. But she was also released in 51. A lot of these women went on and sort of didn't really exactly turn their lives around, but they had some kind of lives. She ended up killing herself probably, maybe 30 years later. They said that she was always bitter person. Marie Olga Sorensen was Kitty's mother. And so she was in a place, rented a room. She actually had a house. And she rented a room out to Ivar Grande. And that's how Kitty met him. And she began to work for Rinnan when he used her house as a meeting place. And of course, he was pretending to be a resistance fighter. A lot of these people said, well, I didn't know that's who he was. I think the most interesting one is Solveig Kleb. She was in Molde. She was already doing, but I love how the Norwegians, they didn't have a resistance. They were doing illegal work. And I think it really also shows the state of mind, why they're so focused on, we're going to have files on these people. It's just sort of how they think. And so she was already doing work. And then she met Bjorn Ost, and this was Rinnan. And so she began working for him. She moved up to Trondheim. And then she lived at Jonsveen in the house with her 8-year-old daughter. Her daughter was going to school up this road, which is half occupied by German soldiers. And she was interviewed. There's a really good interview in Ivar Lind's book. They were interviewing her, during the trial. I said, well, didn't you know what was going on? Didn't you hear? So, well, people came in at night and went down. But her job was to run the office and keep the place clean upstairs. She was told not to go down into the basement. So she said she didn't know, which is, I think she also had a little love affair with Rinnan too. A lot of these women, kind of happened that way. So those are the women, the main women, I think. And she got 8 years, and she was released early. And I think she managed okay. I know Kitty Granda changed her name, married, and did all kinds of things to not be.
Thank you. So another quick question before we move on, Janet. In the defense, when we've looked at some of these trials before, like in France and things, sometimes the defense counsel use this idea that, well, if these people in the dock are guilty, then we're all guilty because our country was occupied, so we all kind of worked for the Nazis. It's just a question of what level we worked at. Did the defense use anything like that? I mean, because as you said, some of these women or these people were kind of negative agents. They didn't necessarily know the full extent of what they were doing and betraying. So did the defense try and make all Norwegians feel guilty as well?
It's so mixed, I don't really know how to answer that. I think, it's the obvious case with the men, like the men involved with Ellison. One person who did not show up was Carl Dolman. He was actually a torturer, but he killed himself. So some of the really bad ones never came to trial, except for Rinnan. But some of the other men, they were involved with undercover stuff. They might lead to that. I don't know. Again, there was this hesitancy about the death penalty. I'm sort of getting that idea, and so they felt like, we need to get this over with because the public is changing. In fact, there were a lot of people that were upset about Quisling. Quisling was shot in, I think, September 1945. He was the first trial. And there were a lot of people who said, well, wait a minute, we were at war, we were occupied, and he did this and that. So I think what you're saying is there's a hesitancy, because it was bad and people had to do things. There were also people that were very mad at some of the people in resistance because, hey, you blew up the train. I didn't have any work. There was a lot of stuff motion stuff that's happening during this time. So
yeah, I mean that's what when we talk about before. That's the thing in a lot of the men who are shaving the heads of women who slept with the Germans in France and other countries. It's because the suggestion is they're kind of guilty. They feel guilty about their own dealings with the Germans. They're taking it out on someone else. And I think, there was a discussion, a sidebar earlier, that people who are from somewhere like the UK, our country wasn't occupied, so we didn't have to question our own involvement. My grandfather, my grandmother, and all my relatives who had to live through the war, what would they have done if they had Nazis walking down their streets? Would they have carried on working? If they were working for the town council, would they have carried on working? Would they have fled to the hills? I mean, these are the questions that Norway, Denmark, France, Belgium, Netherlands, they had to pose these questions about, we've talked about it before, but it's good to talk about this and think about this, but let's get back to the judgment.
Well, one more thing, if you want to find something really interesting along that line, if you go to the Justice Museum, it's also in English, it's in Trondheim, they have a wonderful kind of a question and answer thing about the women they're called them, can't remember the Norwegian name now. It'll come back to me, but they were considered a tiskatukker. So this means French sweetie pie. German sweetie pie. So it's an excellent thing. You can play along with it. Would you make that decision? And that's a good thing for people to try out. It's very, very well done. And, one of my friends, she's passed away now, but her father worked her uncle worked in City Hall in Oslo. And she told me, she said, after the war, I don't understand. My uncle had to disappear for maybe a month because they were looking for him. And she didn't understand. I'm trying to think in my head, okay, what's going on there? Because he was with city government. There may have been National Assembly stuff there, but he also became totally innocent. And the other thing, of the parents of really good friends of mine here in Trondheim, one of the first people I ever interviewed, the mother worked at Gestapo headquarters. I figured out she was at Gestapo headquarters in Bergen at Viten 3. I haven't told my friend yet, but when I was there, I asked where the bowling alleys were. And one was at Gestapo headquarters and one was at another place. Well, the thing that happened, this building that the Gestapo took over in Bergen had actually been built for a trade organization, both handcraft and mechanical, I think. Beautiful building. It had 4 stories, bowling alley, place for people to meet in the restaurant. Well, she worked in the basement. And I think what is that she was hired to have this job. On April 9th, the Germans came in and took it over. But she started working on the 1st of April when the thing opened. So she already was on staff there. And what kind of choice did she have? She told me that she would just take her hand. She wasn't allowed to take any food out. Put your hand over and try to get the grease from the steam into your mouth. So it is, what do? You have to have a job. You have to feed your family. You're going to be on so that is a big question. But this particular group, I don't think there's any way with them. They were monsters.
Pretty bad. Yeah,
they were pretty bad. Yeah. So this is the actual thing that I got to handle, which is so interesting. So this is actually all the verdicts. It took 90 minutes to read all the counts again, and he was given the death penalty. And I think the first page you see over there is kind of introducing him, who he was, and stuff like that. My Norwegian's gotten really good over the last year and a half, so I can read a lot of stuff pretty good now.
Brilliant.
But it's so interesting that they kept that. So that is Fort Christiansen. That white building there was actually built to fight against the Swedes. So it's like it was built in the 1700s and has an incredible view of the area there. But anyway, 8 of his men were sentenced to death. These 2 people here, Sigurd Ribberud and Per Vik, they were commuted to hard labor. But these other ones were considered the worst of the worst. So Barne Juhus, which is about the second one down, there's another one there. They were involved with the Ulsan thing. But a lot of these guys were pretty awful. And so you notice that first picture, I think they had their own lawyers working with them, that long table. They had counsel that, and they would get up in that docket and they would testify. Harry Ronning was involved with a lot of stuff. He's on the bottom. But who was missing? Carl Dolman and Finn Hoff. They were horrible torturers. They were horrible. And with him, Carl and Rinnan often worked together, torturing people. But they escaped.
Mm-hmm.
So Rinnan was really the first to be executed. So he lost his appeal on December 46. His execution would happen, still stated for February 1st, 47. And what's interesting, the day before, Claire Rinnan reluctantly went with the prison's priest to see him. She didn't really want to do it, but the priest, feeling like you got to meet God and all this stuff, she went. And I think it was Idar Grin, a thing that I translated, said he has only a few hours left, so there was no point in yelling. So she went. But by this time, she's trying to back away from him. Although I found out that she was arrested in May of 1945 and then fined 500 kroner for her part. And then later that was dropped. But so she also was, under scrutiny. She couldn't go anywhere. They were going to watch her. She couldn't leave. Anyway, he always believed someone would come and rescue him. He still felt, I have all this great stuff. I can help you out. Cold War's coming. And the night of the power, there was a power surge of some sort. And all the lights went out. And there was a lot of shouting and stuff going on because, the guards are trying to figure out what the heck's going on. And by this time, he's up at the fort, I think. And he thought it was someone coming to help him get away. But no. So lights went back on and they went ahead. So he was tied to a post and shot by the firing squad, by Odd Sorley. If you go deeper into this story, you'll see that Odd Sorley's girlfriend had been tortured by Rinnan several years before. And he was a member of Milorg. He was in charge of the resistance in Norway. And he later became an investigator. So that's the interior of the fort. It's very pretty up there. And then the next shot, I wanted to point this out because when I went up there after talking to them at the Justice Museum, he said, when you go up there, so I went up with my friend, we enter from down the riverside and go up. You come into a wide area, which includes that huge white building that was the fort part. But there was one place they had a row of kind of like, it looked like almost horse barn, but that kind of thing, the low stable doors and stuff like that. And they said that's where they kept the resistance workers before they were shot. And if you walked away from there, that's where they were shot by the Gestapo. Don't go there. The place you need to go is a walk over to this place where the cannon is, because they did not want to have Rinnan's blood on the blood of Jussing's. So they told me where to go, and this is where he was executed. And he was cremated immediately. And then his ashes are somewhere in Levanger in the thing. So this was Justice Nielsen's. He was the head justice. There's no overstatement to say that the defendant was the Gestapo's most effective tool in Norway. He was also a psychopath without one iota of human feeling. He preyed upon the noblest characteristics of his countrymen, all sacrifice, self-sacrifice, trust in human honesty, and love of fatherland to misguide them so they played his game. What's missing out of this quote, because there's too much there, he is acknowledging that he was very smart and that he could do all these things to hold this thing together for 5 years and be so effective. But the sad part is that he had also the ability to mislead people, and then they end up doing, especially the negative agents, so.
Well, brilliant stuff, Janet. At what point, when you talked about the hunt for Rinnan in 1945, at what point during the war would he have been known by name to the good guys, to the Allies? I mean, obviously they knew that units were being infiltrated, people were being taken away, they were being shot. But I guess at the beginning, they wouldn't have known who it was who was doing this. He was using aliases and things like that. At what point did he become a known, if you like, public enemy number one?
Well, I was trying to run that down. I think it's sometime in late 42, 43, because there were 2 attempts by SOE to take him out. And both of them, one ended up in a disaster of people being caught and then killed. But there were 2 attempts on him. So he was always moving around. I mean, that's why he had these different places that he lived in. The cloister became a little more secure up there, but they knew where he was. They kept an eye on that house, and that's what shocked them, that he actually got away. They were planning to go arrest him immediately. They had it all figured out, and they got there, he was gone. So yeah, there were attempts to assassinate him. They were very much aware of him. And that is said that he, for pretty much the war, other places like Bergen, Oslo, other places, the resistance was pretty good. I mean, they could pull out a lot of sabotage and all that. Trondheim was like this hole, it's like dead, because he kept breaking up these resistance groups. So he was very, he was a monster. But he was,
we had the question earlier on, Janet, about whether or not an attempt could have been made to convert him to be a double agent for the Allies. But once you've got murders under your belt, the Allies wouldn't have wanted to work with someone who was that bad. If it was just someone who was sort of working in intelligence, spying, an agent shipping information, but I guess at no point would the Allies considered him trying to make him an asset to them.
Not him, but remember, he was trying to go to Russia, to Soviet Union, and he had this idea that I could do this. Now, the interesting thing is Walter Gemmick. So Gerard Flesch was killed. He was, shot. But Walter Gemmick, who was also head of there in Trondheim, he got a sentence, and eventually he was let go. And I remember Knut Severson just kind of shaking his head. He said, why did they let him go? Well, one reason, the Allies really wanted to, I didn't want to get into the speculation rumors, because I'll let the people in Norway talk about that. But there was this idea, the Allies did kind of want to talk to some of the people they were, not just in Trondheim, but all over Norway. Some of these people, especially in the German side, they wanted to talk to them and maybe even kind of bring them back to their country and to see what they could do. So Gemmick ended up working with East Germany police, and he lived a nice life, and he did terrible things. He was behind a lot of the, helping Rinnan and doing things once people were caught.
Okay, thank you. So Gary asked very early on, you said that you think it was 40% of all the people that were arrested and deported, were through this particular gang. Do you think that's a low estimate? Do you think it's likely to be higher than that in reality?
Well, that's sort of what I saw in the. Oh, I see what you're saying. The total people executed. Yes. So, I mean, it's very interesting. 27 people, I think, in all of Norway were given the death certificate. And 13 of them were from Rinnanbanden. So it says something, because the other ones that were executed were Germans.
Mm.
So, you know, other people that were involved. The other thing they said, and why he thought maybe I won't get the death sentence, he helped identify a lot of Germans, because he worked with them, who were slipping. They were intelligent and Gestapo. They were slipping into Wehrmacht. And he actually, apparently, from what I've read, helped identify them, kind of thinking he'd get a better deal. And, you know, like, again, what the historian said, who you know, he said that he was, he talked a lot. And so he was saying, you know, I could do this and I can do that. And so a lot of the speculation on his funny little escape. And later, you know, he just talked a lot, which he was very good at.
Which suggests that he was an opportunist to some extent, you know, that it was about, yes, he may have had fascist, pro-Nazi leanings, but he also wants this power. The fact he seduces the women and they all work for him, and then as you said, the fact he's then giving names of Germans to the Allies. It's all about, you know, it's all about opportunity, bending with the breeze, and trying to keep himself ahead of the game. But Willie asked another question about, you've done your historical fiction. You've incorporated elements of this story and others into your historical fiction books. Have you ever considered writing, I guess Willie means, a non-fiction book on this, you know, actually going the proper job of historian, looking at some of these aspects of the Norwegian story?
Wow, I honestly sometimes feel like I'm in over my head, because there are some very fine Norwegian historians that are doing this. I have written simple essays, you know, short pieces. I've done stuff on, you know, Teleblog, especially because that's kind of dear to me, what happened there. And I met wonderful people that, you know, teaching, you know, the teaching part of that. I think a wonderful movie is Number 24. I don't know if you've seen that. It's out of Norway. It's been shown on Netflix. But it asks a really interesting question, because it's about their top, you know, top, mostly highly regarded agent. And it starts with him as an old man. And kids are questioning him and what he has to. It's beautifully written. It's Gunnar. And, you know, it's beautifully written, the script. And it's asking that question, what did you do in the war? Or why I had to do this? And it's very, very well done. But it goes into the whole thing. And people told me too that, you know, some of these resistance people got mad at them because, well, you blew up the train station, so I couldn't work. So there's
that's the complexity of the resistance story. But anyway, Janet, it's been fantastic talking to you. We'll see you again in the sidebar, I'm sure, shortly, and another show. But thanks for bringing some of the Norwegian war crimes history to World War II TV. So, folks, as always, thanks very much for your contributions. I will see you all again for those 2 shows tomorrow. And in the meantime, go and watch the back catalogue if you've just found us. So cheers, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Bye. Thanks, Janet.